I grew up in Chicago and came to Alaska 25 plus years ago. Now, I am an assistant professor of business at Alaska Pacific University, and this is after about a 10-year stint as the president of a prolific ad agency. But I didn't come to Alaska for the advertising. I came here for the mountains. Before I spoke the language of triple bottom line and return on investment, I was a climber. I was a mountaineer. I was a 200 nights a year in a tent kind of guy. Sometimes it was a snow cave. But as a youngish climber in a new place, it was difficult to find mentors, people that I could learn from. Now, classically, a mentor is somebody in your life that provides guidance, inspiration, motivation, and is a role model. These are the people that have gone ahead and they've done what you want to do. That was, and it is, hard to find in climbing. Alpine climbing is one of those sports where your partner should be about as skilled as you. Usually you travel in rope teams of 2, maybe 3 people, and you take turns leading, swapping out who's on the front. If the same person stays on the sharp end of the rope, they could exhaust themselves. The problem that I had was that the very best Alaska climbers, they didn't want to climb with me. I mean, who could blame them? And really, the best climbers in the world, people like Lynn Hill and Jeff Lowell, man, they were way out of my reach. These were people that were on the cover of magazines. So I surrounded myself with people that had about the same experience as myself. I didn't really get the knowledge, the counsel, the challenge, and the support that comes from a traditional mentorship relationship. Until I discovered a book that was packed full of mentorship. Sort of. Accidents in North American Mountaineering. This 4 by 8-inch, 72-page treasure outlined all the previous year's most significant and teachable accidents, analyzing what went wrong to be able to help climbers prevent similar fates. I would pore over the pages of this book, and I was drawn to such gems as the victim was climbing on uncharted terrain with significant exposure. Having an escape plan would have made a difference. Or the classic, we are only as good as our information. Plus, this little nugget, a little extra caution is better than any emergency equipment. I later discovered that this is called industry knowledge. So each fall, I would make the pilgrimage to the gear store to buy the latest copy, and I would devour it in one sitting. So this book had actually been published since the 1940s, but in it, I discovered my anti-mentors. If I couldn't find the climber I wanted to be, then I could absolutely, definitely find the climber I didn't want to be. So this was eye-opening for me. First of all, I was not a world-class climber. I was an intermediate climber. And I could really relate more to the people inside the book, because they were a lot more like me. There were lots of intermediate climbers making epic mistakes in the pages of accidents. There was lots of inspiration. Secondly, in life, there's more ways to fail than there are to succeed. Now, one could argue that perhaps you should focus on best practices and principles of success, but it's also helpful to know how to fail so that you can avoid doing the same thing. This was perfectly documented in accidents. And one of the great things about learning from anti-mentors in the pages of a book is that I could learn from them without actually having to climb with them. Lastly, anti-mentors provide a distinctive type of motivation, the kind that keeps you away from disaster. Because you do not want to be the next anti-mentor. Nobody wants to be in this book. Something important to note is that one of the things that makes this book so powerful is that it didn't cast judgment on the people inside the stories. This is not an exercise on looking down on people. Really, it was about empathy, appreciating how easy it is for people to be people, to have skill gaps, to be flawed, to make mistakes, and how those mistakes can be awful when not handled properly. Okay, well, there is this joke about climbers, and it goes, what is the difference between a climber and a large pepperoni pizza? The pizza could feed a family of 4. So after many years of climbing, I went to business school, I earned an MBA, and I started a career in advertising. I stopped collecting the accidents book, and I didn't really think about anti-mentors for a while, until I started meeting them in the business world. There's this misconception that in a professional career, either you seek out a mentor or you don't. The truth is that we're all influenced by the people all around us, whether we select them or we let our circumstances choose them for us. For better or for worse, it's easy to take on the traits of the people that we surround ourselves with. And it doesn't matter if you're in academia, business, the nonprofit world, government, there are bad bosses everywhere. The challenge is, do you learn from them or do you become them? So this may not be easy to admit, but there's a certain pull towards toxic leaders that can be hard to avoid. People are drawn to consensus. The term groupthink, coined in 1972 by Irving Janis, describes this very real phenomenon that groups will often set aside their own beliefs and make bad decisions because they want to fit in. A bad boss can make you a bad boss in the future. Plus, people rationalize, and they like to be on the winning side. It's a very human response to justify away the sins of poor leaders because the work results in good at the end. But how you get there is important too. And bad behavior can become a slippery slope. If people are never held accountable for their actions, it's easy to engage in worse and worse behavior. But there's a different path. You can learn from your anti-mentor's actions. You can take the best of what they do and improve upon the worst. Now, if you're with me and you agree that anti-mentors can be a positive influence, let's talk about how to identify an anti-mentor. If you're looking for one of these, you need to look for 3 characteristics. First, they need to be somebody who has gone ahead of you, career-wise. Mentors and anti-mentors give us a glimpse into what our future could look like. And it's hard to learn from peers. Second, they need to be relatable. If there's large differences in who they are from you, things like gender, level of education, industry, it can be difficult to see yourself in their actions and to learn lessons from their actions. Learning from anti-mentors is about empathy, and greater connection leads to more empathy. Lastly, you need to be specific about what actions you want to learn from. Like with mentors, it can be difficult and complicated, and people are generally a mix of strengths and weaknesses. If you want to learn from them, you have to identify the specific things, certain actions that they've taken that you want to do differently. So you can imagine a situation where somebody schedules repeatedly meetings and cancels them, right? And the 12th time you go to their office, it'd be easy to get frustrated, only to hear from their secretary that they overscheduled and they wouldn't be able to meet you. But really, this is an opportunity. It's a chance to do the opposite when you are put in the same situation. Actions like these, from these wonderful anti-mentors, can experientially teach you to be more respectful of others. So while my anti-mentors now are not teaching me to avoid deadly falls, I'm still learning important lessons from them. So I challenge you to think about 2 or maybe 3 people in your professional life who are ahead of you, relatable, and specifically awful. What can they teach you? So I want to leave you with a mentorship type quote that has been attributed to Isaac Newton. And he has said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And I would add to that you can learn from both good and awful giants. Thank you.